My sister smiled at me from across the wedding reception and raised her champagne glass. Then she turned toward the 200 guests and said, "Everyone, I want to thank my sister Emily for coming tonight. It takes a very strong person to attend a wedding when she knows she'll never have what I have." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My mother covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked. My father stared at his plate. My sister's new husband looked confused. And I just stood there holding my glass, listening to the family that had spent years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. They thought I had come to the wedding because I was desperate for their approval. They thought I was still the broke, unsuccessful sister they could laugh at. What they didn't know was that I had received an email that morning that changed everything. And by the end of the night, my sister would discover that the person she had invited to embarrass was the one person standing between her and the biggest financial mistake of her life. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my childhood, I lived in my sister Olivia's shadow. Olivia was 3 years older than me, beautiful, confident, popular, and incredibly good at making people like her. My parents adored her. She was the daughter they talked about when relatives visited. She won awards at school, became captain of the cheerleading team, and somehow always managed to be surrounded by friends. I was different. I was quiet. I loved books. I liked computers, numbers, and business. I wasn't interested in being popular. My father used to say, "Emily, you need to be more like Olivia." I heard that sentence so many times that eventually I stopped wondering what was wrong with me. Olivia learned early that she could get almost anything from our parents. When she wanted a car, they bought her one. When she wanted an expensive college, they paid for it. When she wanted to travel with friends, they gave her money. When I asked for help with college, my father told me, "You're smart, figure it out." So I did. I attended a public university and worked 2 jobs. I lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates. I drove an old car that broke down so often that I knew the local mechanic by first name. My family thought I was struggling. What they didn't know was that I was learning. During college, I became fascinated with financial technology. I started building small software tools that helped local businesses track expenses and cash flow. At first, nobody cared. Then a small restaurant owner offered to pay me for one of my tools. That $500 payment changed my life. I realized people would pay for something I had built. So I kept going. After graduation, I started a small software company from my apartment. For the first year, I had almost no money. I worked constantly. I ate cheap food. I wore the same clothes. I didn't tell my family much because every time I talked about my business, they laughed. Olivia once asked me what my company did. I explained it. She smiled and said, "So basically you're making spreadsheets." My father laughed. My mother told me I should apply for a stable job. I didn't argue. I kept building. Then everything changed. One of my software products caught the attention of a major regional bank. They wanted to license it. Then another bank. Then another. Within 3 years, my company had grown from a one-person operation into a real business. I hired employees. I moved into an office. We started receiving investment offers. I turned most of them down. I didn't want to lose control too early. Eventually, the company became worth several $1,000,000. I bought a house. I paid off my student loans. I hired my first full-time employee. And I still didn't tell my family how successful I had become. Why? Because I wanted to know whether they would ever be proud of me without knowing how much money I had. I got my answer when Olivia announced her engagement. Her fiancé's name was Daniel. He was charming, wealthy, and worked for his family's real estate company. My parents immediately adored him. When they met him, my father said, "Now that's the kind of man Olivia deserves." I was sitting beside them. I heard every word. I smiled anyway. Olivia's wedding became the biggest event my family had ever planned. The venue was expensive. The guest list was enormous. The flowers were extravagant. The dress cost more than my first car. My mother spent months planning every detail. And somehow, I was barely involved. When I asked Olivia if she needed help, she said, "You're sweet, Emily, but I think we'll let the people who understand luxury handle things." I knew exactly what she meant. I wasn't rich enough for her world. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother called me. "Emily, I need you to do something." "What?" "Please don't make the wedding about yourself." I was stunned. "I'm not planning to." She sighed. "Just be careful. Olivia has been stressed." I asked, "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because she doesn't want any drama." I almost laughed. I've never caused drama at her events. My mother didn't respond. That was when I started wondering whether they were planning something. I was right. The wedding invitation arrived with a handwritten note from Olivia. "Please come, I want you there." For a moment, I was touched. Then I read the second line. "Try to dress appropriately this time." I stared at the note. I had no idea what she meant. I decided to ignore it. On the morning of the wedding, I put on a simple black dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing expensive looking. I arrived at the venue alone. The ceremony was beautiful. Olivia looked stunning. Daniel looked nervous. For a few minutes, I forgot everything else. I watched my sister walk down the aisle. And despite everything, I felt proud of her. Then the reception began. Dinner was served. People laughed. Music played. I sat at a table near the back with some distant relatives. My parents barely spoke to me. Olivia walked around greeting guests. Eventually, she reached my table. She looked at me, then at my dress. Then she smiled. "You actually came." I said, "Of course." She leaned closer. "Did you really think I wanted you here?" I stared at her. "What?" She smiled. "Mom invited you because she didn't want you to look pathetic sitting at home alone." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "Olivia, today is your wedding. I'm not doing this." She laughed. "That's exactly why I wanted you here." Then she walked away. I should have left. I almost did. But then my mother came over. She sat beside me. "Please stay until after dinner." I asked why. She said, "Olivia has something planned." My stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" My mother looked uncomfortable. "I think you should just stay calm." That was when I knew. They had invited me because they wanted to embarrass me. I just didn't know how. I found out during the speeches. Olivia's maid of honor spoke first. Then Daniel's best man. Then my father. My father stood up with a microphone. He smiled. "I've watched both of my daughters grow up." He looked at Olivia. Then at me. "Some children make their parents proud in ways you never expect." I knew where this was going. He continued. "Olivia has always been ambitious. She's built a beautiful life, found an amazing husband, and created a future that makes us proud." Everyone clapped. Then my father looked at me. "Emily has taken a different path." There was nervous laughter. I stared at him. He said, "She's always been independent." That word sounded like an insult. Then he added, "Sometimes maybe too independent." People laughed again. My father raised his glass. "To Olivia, for proving that success isn't just about having dreams. It's about actually achieving them." I felt my face burn. He sat down. Then Olivia stood. She took the microphone. She looked at me and smiled. "Actually, Dad, I have something else to say." I knew immediately. She walked toward my table. "Everyone, My sister Emily has always been the independent one. She laughed. She doesn't believe in marriage. She doesn't believe in settling down. And apparently, she doesn't believe in spending money on anything except herself. People laughed. I didn't react. Olivia continued. That's why I want to thank her for coming tonight. She raised her glass. Because it takes a strong woman to watch her younger sister have everything she couldn't achieve. The room went silent. Then Olivia said the words that changed everything. Some people spend their whole lives being jealous of people who succeed. She looked directly at me. But that's okay, Emily. You can keep watching. A few people laughed. My mother smiled nervously. My father looked satisfied. I looked at Daniel. Her new husband. He wasn't laughing. He looked uncomfortable. I realized he had no idea what she was doing. Olivia handed the microphone back. Then she returned to her seat. Everyone expected me to cry. I didn't. I stood up. I walked toward the stage. My father immediately shook his head. Emily, don't. I took the microphone. I looked around the room. Then I smiled. Thank you, Olivia. She looked confused. For what? For making this so easy. Her smile disappeared. I turned toward the guests. I want to clarify something. My father stood up. Emily, sit down. I ignored him. I said, my family seems to believe I'm here because I'm jealous of my sister. Olivia laughed. I continued. They seem to believe I'm unsuccessful. My mother whispered, Emily. I raised my hand. Don't worry, Mom. I'm not going to ruin the wedding. Then I looked at Daniel. But I do need to tell you something. He looked at me. What? I said, you should probably know who actually owns the property your new company is about to purchase. Daniel's face changed. Olivia froze. My father looked at me. What are you talking about? I smiled. I'm talking about the Carter Development Project. Daniel stood up. What does that have to do with you? I said, everything. 3 months earlier, Daniel's company had been negotiating to purchase a large parcel of land outside Charlotte for a luxury development. The property had been owned by a group of investors. Or at least that's what everyone thought. The land was actually held through a private investment company. My investment company. I had acquired the property months earlier because I knew the city was planning a major infrastructure project nearby. Daniel's company had approached my company with an offer. We had been negotiating for weeks. But they didn't know who was behind the company. I had intentionally kept my identity private. Why? Because I wanted the deal evaluated on its numbers, not on my family connection. And now I was standing at my sister's wedding, holding the microphone. Daniel looked at me. Are you saying you own that property? I nodded. Yes. Olivia stood up. That's impossible. I looked at her. Is it? She turned toward Daniel. Tell her she's lying. Daniel didn't answer. He looked at me. Then he asked, You're Emily Carter. I nodded. He looked shocked. I've been negotiating with your company for 2 months. I smiled. Yes. Olivia stared at me. My father looked like he had just been hit. My mother whispered, Oh my God. I continued. Your company made an offer to buy the land. I rejected it. Daniel asked why. Because the terms weren't acceptable. He looked confused. Then why didn't you tell me? I said, because I wanted a fair negotiation. Olivia suddenly walked toward me. You planned this. I shook my head. No. She looked angry. You waited until my wedding to embarrass me. I laughed softly. Olivia, you spent the last 20 minutes doing exactly that to me. She froze. I turned toward the guests. I didn't come here to expose anyone. Then I looked at my family. I came because she's my sister. That sentence made the room uncomfortable. I continued. But apparently, my family invited me because they wanted to make me feel small. My father said, "That's not what happened." I looked at him. "You stood up in front of 200 people and called me unsuccessful." He said, "I was making a toast." "You called me jealous." My mother started crying. "You told everyone I couldn't achieve what Olivia had achieved." My father looked down. Then I said something that changed the entire room. "Do you know what the funniest part is?" Nobody answered. "I've been more successful than Olivia for years." Olivia's face turned red. I explained that my company owned several commercial properties. I explained that my software business had been profitable for years. I explained that I had invested in real estate and technology. And I explained that the property Daniel's company wanted was worth significantly more than their offer. I wasn't trying to brag. I was telling them the truth. The same truth they had never bothered to ask about. Daniel looked at me. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I looked at my family. Because I wanted to know whether they loved me without knowing what I was worth. Nobody moved. Then I looked at Olivia. And now I know. Olivia started crying. "You hate me." I shook my head. "No." "Then why are you doing this?" "Because you humiliated me in front of everyone." She said, "It was a joke." I looked at the guests. Did everyone hear that? Nobody laughed. Then Daniel spoke. "Olivia, stop." She turned toward him. "What?" He looked furious. "You told me your sister was broke." Olivia froze. Daniel continued. "You told me she was jealous of you." Olivia looked at me. I said nothing. Daniel asked, "You knew she owned that property?" She didn't answer. He looked at me. "Emily, is the development project still available?" I nodded. "It is." He asked, "Can we continue negotiations?" I smiled. "Monday morning." Daniel nodded. Then he turned toward Olivia. "Your sister just saved us from making a terrible deal." Olivia looked stunned. Daniel continued. "And you spent the entire evening humiliating her." He walked away. Olivia stood there crying. My mother came toward me. She whispered, "Please stop." I looked at her. "Stop what?" "This." I said, "I'm not doing anything." She looked around the room. I said, "I'm simply telling the truth." My father finally walked toward me. He looked embarrassed. "Emily, I'm sorry." I stared at him. "For what?" He swallowed. "For what I said." I asked, "Would you still apologize if you thought I was poor?" He didn't answer. I already knew. I placed the microphone on the table. Then I said, "That's what I thought." I walked out of the reception. I didn't scream. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't ruin the wedding. I simply left. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, my phone exploded. Messages from relatives. Messages from family friends. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some apologized. Some asked questions. Some suddenly wanted to reconnect. I ignored most of them. Then Daniel called. He apologized for what had happened. I told him he didn't need to apologize for Olivia. He said, "I do." I asked why. He said, "Because I believed her." I didn't know what to say. Then he asked about the property. We met the following Monday. We renegotiated the deal. This time, everything was professional. No family. No emotions. No wedding. Just business. The transaction eventually closed. Daniel's company got the land. My company made an excellent return. And the strange thing was, he and I eventually became friends. Not close friends, but people who respected each other. Olivia, however, wasn't happy. She accused me of destroying her wedding. She told our relatives that I had intentionally humiliated her. My mother called me and begged me to apologize. I asked her, for what? She said, for revealing everything. I said, Mom, she humiliated me first. She said, but she's your sister. I replied, exactly, that's why it hurt. That ended the conversation. For months, my relationship with my parents was almost non-existent. Then something unexpected happened. My father came to my office. He sat down. He looked at me. And he said, I owe you more than an apology. I waited. He said, I've spent years comparing you to Olivia. I nodded. He continued. I thought Olivia was successful because she looked successful. I smiled slightly. And you thought I was unsuccessful because I didn't. He nodded. I was wrong. I asked, why did it take you so long to realize that? He looked down. Because I never asked what you were actually doing. That was the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. I told him I didn't need him to be impressed by my money. I needed him to respect me. He said, I do. I wanted to believe him. But trust doesn't return in one conversation. It takes time. So I gave him time. Months passed. Then my mother started reaching out. Not asking for money. Not asking for business favors. Just checking in. She asked how I was. I asked how she was. We slowly started rebuilding our relationship. Olivia was harder. For nearly a year, we barely spoke. Then one afternoon, she showed up at my office. She looked nervous. I asked her why she was there. She said, I owe you an apology. I said nothing. She continued. I was jealous of you. That surprised me. I asked why. She laughed bitterly. Because you didn't care what people thought. I stared at her. She said, you were always doing your own thing. You didn't need Dad's approval. You didn't need Mom to tell you you were beautiful. You didn't need everyone to like you. I said, I spent most of my life wishing I was you. She looked shocked. I continued. And you spent yours wishing you were me. She smiled sadly. Apparently. For the first time in years, we both laughed. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. But because we finally understood each other. I didn't forgive her immediately. But eventually, I did. Not because what she did was okay. Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life carrying it. The wedding incident became a family story. People eventually stopped talking about the insults. They remembered the moment Daniel discovered that the quiet sister he had been told was unsuccessful actually owned the property his company wanted. They remembered my father looking stunned. They remembered Olivia standing speechless. But I remember something else. I remember sitting alone in my car after leaving the wedding. I remember looking at myself in the rearview mirror and realizing I had spent years trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. That night changed me. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped showing people my financial statements. I stopped talking about my achievements. I stopped trying to convince my family that I was successful. Because I finally understood something. Success isn't something you announce. It's something you build. Quietly. Consistently. Over years. And eventually, the truth speaks for itself. My family invited me to my sister's wedding just to humiliate me. They thought I was the poor sister. The unsuccessful sister. The jealous sister. They thought I would sit quietly while they laughed at me. They didn't know that I owned the property they needed for their next major business project. They didn't know my company was worth millions. They didn't know I had built a life without their help. And they certainly didn't expect me to stand up in front of 200 people and reveal the truth. But here's the part that matters most. I didn't win because I embarrassed them. I won because I stopped caring whether they thought I was successful. That night, I didn't prove my worth to my family. I proved something to myself. I didn't need their approval anymore. And sometimes, the biggest revenge isn't humiliating the people who tried to humiliate you. It's standing calmly in front of everyone who underestimated you and realizing you no longer need to prove them wrong. My family invited me to my sister's wedding just to make me feel small. Big mistake, because they spent the entire evening trying to show everyone how little I had. And before the night was over, everyone discovered just how much I had built.